My name is David. I'm a 38-year-old corporate lawyer who spent most of his adult life believing that precision, control, and predictability could stave off chaos. My wife, Claire, is my polar opposite and adventurous, spontaneous travel writer whose whirlwind approach to life has always felt like the perfect counterbalance to my rigidity. At least, that's what I used to think. Last Tuesday, Claire left for what she described as a work trip. The itinerary seemed plausible at first-day flight to Buenos Aires, a hotel booking under her name, and a series of vague mentions about interviews with locals for her latest article on hidden gems of South America. But something gnawed at me. She'd been unusually vague about the details, which wasn't like her. Claire's spontaneity never veered into secrecy, at least not until now. The damning moment came when I found a plane ticket on her deskin and used one. A flight to a completely different city from the one she claimed to be visiting. It was dated for the same time. She was supposed to be midair en route to Buenos Aires. My heart sank. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation, but the shadows of doubt were impossible to ignore. I hired a private investigator, an act that felt like a betrayal in itself. I justified it by telling myself I was protecting our marriage. The truth? I was trying to preserve my sense of control. The first report from the PI arrived a few days later, and it only muddied the waters further. Claire had indeed gone to Buenos Aires, but her activities didn't align with her work. The investigator observed her meeting a man, someone who wasn't a fellow writer or even remotely connected to journalism. He was polished, charismatic, and alarmingly familiar with Claire. The photos made my stomach churn, but it wasn't just an affair. That would have been too simple. The PI's second report revealed something I couldn't have imagined in my darkest dreams. The man Claire was meeting was connected to an international smuggling ring. They were using travel writers to move stolen artifacts across borders under the guise of research. And Claire? My wife of 8 years, the woman who I thought I knew better than anyone, was not only involved, but appeared to be romantically entangled with the ringleader. I've spent days trying to piece together how I missed the signs, how I ignored the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. But before I could even confront her, my world shattered again. Federal agents barged into my office this morning, accusing me of aiding Claire in her smuggling operation. My signature was on documents I'd never seen before, transferring money to offshore accounts linked to the ring. Claire framed me. I don't know if she ever loved me or if our marriage was just a convenient cover for her schemes. But now, I'm fighting to clear my name, survive the fallout of her betrayal, and uncover the truth about the woman I once thought was my soulmate. The hours after the federal agents left my office were a blur of panic, anger, and disbelief. I sat at my desk, staring at the documents they had slapped down in front of me before storming off. My signature was unmistakable, but I knew I hadn't signed those papers. It didn't matter. The government had them, and I was implicated. I called my lawyer, a close friend from law school named Greg. He picked up on the first ring. "David, what the hell's going on?" he barked. I could barely get the words out to explain the situation. Greg, ever the voice of reason, didn't mince words. "If this is a setup, you need to figure out how they got your signature. It's forgery, David, but the feds won't care about that unless you have hard proof." Proof. That word echoed in my head as I sifted through my memories. Had Claire ever borrowed my pen? Had I ever left important documents unattended? My mind raced, but I came up blank. Still, one thing was clear. Claire wasn't just lying to me. She was systematically destroying my life. That night, I went home to an empty house. Claire had texted me earlier in the week saying she'd be gone longer than expected, but hadn't elaborated. I wanted to tear the place apart, but I knew that wouldn't help. Instead, I poured a drink, sat down in the living room, and stared at her travel books lining the shelves. Each one now felt like a lie. Then I remembered the investigator's last update. The man Claire was meeting, the smuggler, had checked into a hotel under a pseudonym. That detail gnawed at me. If he was being cautious, why wasn't Claire? It didn't add up, and that inconsistency felt like a thread I could pull. I called the investigator back. "Can you get me everything you have on this guy?" I asked. The hesitation in his voice told me he wasn't sure if I could handle what he'd already found. "It's not just artifacts, David," the investigator finally said. "They're smuggling high-value items, jewels, rare art, even antiquities that could destabilize markets. It's bigger than we thought." Bigger. That word landed like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just caught in a marital betrayal or a criminal conspiracy. I was a pawn in something global, something dangerous. The next morning, Greg called me again. "I pulled a favor from a contact at the FBI," he said. "David, you're in deep shit. They've been investigating this smuggling ring for years. Your name just made their radar light up like a Christmas tree." "Does Claire's name come up?" I asked, holding my breath. "She's a ghost," Greg replied grimly. "There's no trace of her in any of their intel. Whatever she's doing, she's damn good at covering her tracks. Except for one thing." "What's that?" "She left you holding the bag." That was the breaking point. I wasn't going to sit back and let Claire ruin my life without a fight. I dug into our shared accounts, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that might give me leverage. What I found left me cold. Transactions I didn't recognize, payments to shell companies, bookings for trips she never told me about. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. Claire had been planning this for years, and I'd been too blinded by love or maybe just ignorance to see it. Then I found something that chilled me to the bone, a folder on her laptop labeled D-Notes. Inside were spreadsheets, travel itineraries, and photos. Photos of me, my office, and even my signature on those damn documents. She had recorded everything. As I stared at the evidence, a question gnawed at me. Was I just collateral damage, or had she always intended to destroy me? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing: if I didn't act fast, I wouldn't have the chance to find out. Armed with what I found on Claire's laptop, I spent the rest of the night piecing together a timeline. Each new discovery felt like another dagger to the chest. Trips I thought were innocent work assignments, they were smuggling runs. That friend she always mentioned meeting for coffee, likely her partner in crime or worse, her lover. Every detail I uncovered painted a picture of a woman I didn't know. I didn't sleep. By the time the sun rose, my living room was littered with printouts and notes. I had enough to start connecting Claire to the smuggling ring, but proving my innocence was another matter. Every shred of evidence tied me to her crimes. My signature on those documents, the joint accounts, the trip she took under my name. She hadn't just framed me, she'd made it look effortless. I knew I needed help. Greg was a brilliant lawyer, but I needed someone who could think like Claire, someone who could navigate the underworld she seemed so comfortable in. That's when I remembered Marcus, a client I'd worked with years ago. Marcus was a former con artist who'd turned his life around, but his knowledge of forgery and fraud was unparalleled. It was a long shot, but I called him anyway. "Marcus, I'm in trouble," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "You? Trouble?" he replied, laughing. "What's the matter? Did you sign something without reading it first?" His joke hit too close to home. "It's worse than that. I need to prove someone forged my signature. Can you help?" There was a pause. "If it's forgery, I can help," Marcus said finally. "But it'll cost you. Name your price. Let me take a look at what you've got first. Then we'll talk." By noon, I was sitting in a diner across from Marcus, handing him copies of the documents the feds had shown me. He studied them carefully, his brow furrowed. "This is good work," he muttered, almost to himself. "Whoever did this knows their stuff." "It was my wife," I said flatly. Marcus looked up, surprised. "Your wife? Damn, David. You corporate types sure know how to pick him. Can you prove it's a forgery or not?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. There are a few tells subtle, but they're there. I'll need to run some tests, but if I'm right, I can give you what you need to challenge this." It was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in days, but it was short-lived. When I got home, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Someone knew I was getting close. That night, I went back to Claire's laptop, combing through every file I hadn't touched yet. I found an encrypted folder I hadn't noticed before. It took me hours to crack the password, but when I did, what I found was devastating. Photos of Claire and the man she'd been meeting in Buenos Aires, lounging on a yacht, sipping champagne and laughing. Documents detailing shipments of stolen artifacts with dates and destinations. And then there was a video recording of Claire looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, David," she began, her voice calm and cold, "then you've already found out more than you should. I told you once that your obsession with control would be your downfall. I guess I was right." Her smile was the final blow. She had planned for everything, even this. I turned off the laptop and sat in the dark, my hands trembling. Claire had outmaneuvered me at every turn. She had framed me, betrayed me, and somehow still had the upper hand. But there was one thing she didn't account for. I wasn't ready to give up. If she thought she could ruin me and walk away unscathed, she was wrong. I didn't care how long it took or how dangerous it was. I was going to uncover the truth, clear my name, and make Claire pay for every lie, every betrayal, and every moment of agony she put me through. I spent the next day feeling like a man trapped in quicksand. Every move I made to free myself only seemed to drag me deeper into the chaos Claire had created. My career was on the line, my reputation in shambles, and now, with that cryptic text, my safety was in question. If Claire's message on the laptop was her twisted farewell, this anonymous warning was a sign that someone else was watching me, someone who didn't want me piecing together the puzzle. Marcus called me later that evening. "David, I got good news and bad news." "Start with the good," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed there was such a thing anymore. "The signatures are forgeries. No doubt about it. Whoever did this mimicked your style well, but it's not perfect. I've got enough to challenge the documents and prove you didn't sign them." I exhaled in relief. "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that whoever set this up wasn't just trying to frame you, they wanted it to stick. The forgery, the accounts, the fake trips. It's overkill. They weren't just sloppy. They were confident you'd never dig this deep. That tells me they're either arrogant or dangerous. Or both," I muttered, thinking of Claire. "There's more," Marcus said. "The guy Claire's working with, he's not just some smuggler. He's high profile, the kind of guy Interpol keeps tabs on. You're playing with fire here." Fire didn't even begin to describe it, but Marcus's findings gave me the first real weapon I could use to defend myself. I had proof the documents were forged. It wasn't enough to bring Claire down, but it was enough to buy me time. The next morning, I met with Greg in his office, handing him everything Marcus had compiled. "This is our opening," I said. "If we can prove these documents are fake, the feds have to step back." Greg studied the files and nodded. "It's a start, but it won't exonerate you, David. Not unless we can prove Claire orchestrated all of this." I sat back in my chair, my fists clenched. "How do we do that?" By finding her. If she's involved with someone high profile, she's got to slip up eventually. You need to get ahead of her next move. That meant going back to the investigator. This time, I asked him to focus solely on Claire, where she'd been, who she'd met, and where she might be going next. The trail was cold at first, but a breakthrough came when he discovered a recent reservation under her alias at a luxury villa in Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo, the playground of the rich and infamous. It was the kind of place Claire had always joked about visiting, if we ever won the lottery. Now, she was there, likely using the fortune she'd amassed from smuggling. I decided to go. It was a reckless plan, but waiting for her to come back to ruin my life further wasn't an option. If Claire wanted to stay one step ahead, she'd have to deal with me face to face. Greg tried to talk me out of it. You realize how dangerous this is, right? If she's tied to a criminal operation, you're walking into a den of vipers. I don't have a choice, I said. This isn't just about clearing my name anymore. It's about figuring out who the hell my wife really is. By the time I boarded the plane to Monaco, I felt like a man heading into battle. I didn't know what I would find or how far I'd have to go to get answers, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was about me, about the years I'd spent living in a lie, blind to the truth right in front of me. When I landed, the investigator had already sent me Claire's location, a private event at an exclusive casino. I dressed the part, blending in with the wealthy patrons as I scanned the room for her. And then I saw her, Claire, my wife, standing next to the man I'd seen in the investigator's photos, laughing and sipping champagne as if she didn't have a care in the world. In that moment, all the anger, confusion, and heartbreak I'd been carrying boiled over. I wasn't going to let her walk away again. Not this time. I kept my distance, trying to appear inconspicuous as I navigated through the crowd of Monte Carlo's elite. The casino was everything you'd expect. Opulent chandeliers, clinking glasses of champagne, and whispers of money changing hands. But my focus was singular Claire. She was radiant, her laughter ringing out like she didn't have a care in the world. The man next to her, tall, suave, and unmistakably dangerous, had his hand on her back, the kind of gesture that screamed intimacy. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not here. Instead, I followed them. They moved from the main room to a private lounge guarded by men in suits with earpieces. Claire flashed a card, and the guard stepped aside. It was obvious I wouldn't be getting in the same way. I needed another plan. Slipping away, I found a service hallway and blended in with the staff, carrying trays and linens. I'd spent years mastering the art of looking like I belonged in boardrooms and courthouses. Now, I used those same skills to slip past security, my heart pounding with every step. The private lounge was separated from the rest of the casino by heavy doors, but I found a small window that let me peer inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Claire and her smuggler lover. There were others, men and women, all dressed to the nines, seated around a table with maps, artifacts, and stacks of cash spread out like a feast. They were planning something, their gestures animated as they pointed at documents and exchanged hushed words. Claire was at the center of it all, her voice calm and authoritative. It was a side of her I'd never seen before, a side she clearly kept hidden from me. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was witnessing. This wasn't just smuggling, it was organized, calculated, and on a scale far larger than I'd imagined. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Whatever this meeting was, it was the proof I needed to blow Claire's operation wide open. But as I leaned in to get a better angle, my foot slipped and the sound echoed through the hallway. I froze. Inside the room, Claire's head whipped toward the door. "What was that?" she asked, her voice sharp. One of the guards moved to investigate. I had seconds to decide, run or hide. My instincts kicked in, and I ducked into a nearby closet, holding my breath as footsteps approached. The guard opened the door, shining a flashlight inside. I stayed as still as possible, my heart thundering in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, the light disappeared, and I heard him mutter something before walking away. I waited a few more minutes before slipping out of the closet and making my way back to the main casino floor. I needed to get out of there, but not before sending the video to Greg and Marcus. They needed to see what I'd found. As soon as the video uploaded, I texted Greg. This is it. They can't ignore this. But before I could leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting a guard, but it was Claire. Her expression was a mix of shock and anger. "David," she said, her voice low, "what the hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice shaking with rage. "What the hell are you involved in, Claire?" She glanced around, her eyes narrowing. "Not here," she hissed. "Follow me." Against my better judgment, I followed her to an empty balcony overlooking the glittering Monte Carlo skyline. For a moment, it felt surreal, just the two of us, as if we were any other couple enjoying the view. But the tension was electric. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone clipped. "No, Claire," I shot back. "You shouldn't be here. What the hell is this? Smuggling? Framing me? Was any of it real?" Her face softened, but I wasn't buying it. "David," she said, "you don't understand. This isn't about you." "That's a lie," I snapped. "You made it about me when you signed my name on those documents, when you sent federal agents to my office." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I didn't have a choice. You don't know what these people are capable of." "Then tell me," I said, daring her to explain. But instead of answering, she looked over her shoulder. "You need to leave. Now." I could hear the urgency in her voice, but I wasn't leaving without answers. "Why, Claire? So you can get back to your little operation? Or are you just trying to save your own skin?" Before she could respond, the doors to the balcony burst open, and two of the guards from the private lounge stepped out. Claire's face twisted in panic. "Go," she whispered fiercely. "If they find you here, dash." But it was too late. They'd already seen me. The guards wasted no time. One of them barked something into a radio while the other advanced toward me, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his hip. Claire stepped between us, her hands raised. "He's with me," she said quickly, her voice calm but edged with desperation. The guards didn't buy it. "Boss didn't mention any guests," one of them said, glaring at me. "You need to come with us." I knew I had two choices: comply and hope I could talk my way out of this, or run and risk being hunted down. I glanced at Claire, hoping for some signal, some hint of what she wanted me to do. Her face was unreadable, but then she made her move, with a speed and precision I didn't know she had. She swung her elbow into the guard closest to her, knocking him off balance. "Run!" she shouted. I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the door, pushing past the other guard and into the crowded casino. Behind me, I heard shouts and the pounding of footsteps. My heart raced as I weaved through the sea of well-dressed patrons, doing everything I could to disappear into the chaos. I spotted a service exit near the back of the casino and sprinted toward it, shoving the door open and bursting into the cool night air. The alley was dark and empty, the perfect place to catch my breath and plan my next move. But I knew I couldn't stay there long. They'd be looking for me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, half expecting another threatening text. Instead, it was a message from Greg. "Got the video. This changes everything. Get somewhere safe." Safe. The word felt meaningless. There was no safety as long as Claire's smuggling ring, and now their henchmen were after me. But Greg was right. I needed to lay low, regroup, and figure out my next step. I flagged down a cab and directed the driver to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. Once inside, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. Only then did I allow myself to sit down and breathe. My mind raced as I replayed everything that had happened in the last few hours. Claire's warning, her sudden act of defense, the fear in her eyes. For the first time, I began to wonder if she was as much a victim as I was. But then I remembered the video I'd taken of her leading that meeting. The calm authority in her voice. Was she playing both sides, or was this just another manipulation? I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to force Claire's hand. The next morning, I reached out to the private investigator. "I need to know everything you can find on Claire's lover," I said. "Who he is, where he's from, and what he's doing in Monte Carlo." The investigator was efficient. Within hours, he had a dossier waiting for me. The man's name was Victor Sloan, a notorious figure in the black market trade. He was ruthless, connected, and untouchable. If Claire was tangled up with him, she was in deeper than I'd thought. But the most alarming detail was this. Victor was staying in the same villa Claire had booked under her alias. Whatever their relationship was, it wasn't casual. That night, I sat in the dimly lit motel room, staring at the dossier and trying to piece it all together. Claire's betrayal, the forgery, the smuggling, it all pointed to one conclusion. Whatever love we'd shared was gone. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about survival. And if Claire wasn't going to tell me the truth, I was going to take it from her. I booked a flight back home. Monte Carlo was too dangerous, and I needed to regroup. But before I left, I made one final move. I sent Victor's name and photo to the FBI, along with a copy of the video I'd recorded. If Claire wanted to play games, she was about to learn I could play them too. The flight home was grueling. Every mile that brought me closer to my life in the States seemed to push me further into an abyss of uncertainty. What was waiting for me back home? More federal agents with questions I couldn't fully answer? More revelations about Claire's double life? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I wasn't the same man who had left just days ago. I landed late in the evening, exhausted but too wired to sleep. My first stop wasn't home, it was Greg's office. He met me there, bleary-eyed but ready. "You look like hell," he said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey as I sank into a chair. "Thanks," I muttered, taking the glass he offered. "Any word from the FBI?" Greg nodded. "They're taking the video seriously. Victor Sloan is already a person of interest in multiple investigations, but your footage puts Claire in the thick of it. They want to talk to you again, this time as a witness, not a suspect." It was a small victory, but it wasn't enough. "What about clearing my name?" I asked. "That's going to take time," Greg admitted. "The forgery is a start, and the FBI's interest in Claire and Victor gives us leverage. But until we can definitively prove you were set up, the shadow of this case is going to hang over you." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. "Then we need to get ahead of Claire. If the FBI knows about Victor, it's only a matter of time before she finds out too. She'll bolt." Greg raised an eyebrow. "You think she's going to run?" "She has to," I said. "The only question is where." For the next few days, I laid low, watching and waiting. Claire didn't reach out, but the investigator sent me updates. She was still in Monte Carlo, but her movements were increasingly erratic. She'd switched hotels twice and canceled the remainder of her villa reservation. Victor had vanished entirely. Then, late one night, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The investigator had tracked a flight Claire had booked destination, New York City. She'd be landing the next morning. "Why New York?" Greg asked when I called to share the news. Probably to disappear in plain sight, I said. If she stays in the States, she's harder to extradite, and she knows how to blend in when she needs to. Greg sighed. What's your plan, David? Because if you go after her without the FBI's help, you're risking everything. I'm not waiting for them to catch up, I said firmly. This is my fight. The next morning, I was in New York, waiting. I stayed close to the terminal where Claire's flight was set to land, keeping an eye out for her. When she finally appeared, wheeling a small suitcase and wearing oversized sunglasses, my heart clenched. For a moment, it was like seeing the woman I'd married, the woman I thought I knew. But the memory faded as quickly as it came. She wasn't that person anymore. Maybe she never had been. I followed her from a distance as she grabbed a cab and headed into the city. The drive was agonizing, but I stayed on her tail, careful not to lose her in the chaos of Manhattan traffic. She finally stopped at a small boutique hotel in Soho, a place with enough luxury to suit her taste, but discreet enough to avoid attention. I waited until she checked in before stepping out of my cab. I didn't have a plan, not really, but I wasn't leaving until I got answers. I marched into the lobby, my pulse hammering in my ears. The clerk barely glanced at me as I walked toward the elevators, blending in with the flow of guests. I pressed the button for the floor Claire had gone to and leaned against the wall, trying to calm my nerves. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out and scanned the hallway. Room 405. That was the number the investigator had given me. I approached the door, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. My hand hovered over the doorknob. This was it, my chance to confront her, to demand the truth, to finally end this nightmare. I knocked. A pause. Then, the sound of footsteps on the other side. When the door opened, Claire stood there, her face a mixture of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but. "We need to talk. Now." Claire stepped aside, letting me into the room without a word. I scanned the space as I entered a small but elegant suite. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, clothes spilling out as if she barely had time to unpack. She closed the door behind me, and for a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. "I knew you'd find me," she said finally, her voice soft but resigned. "Did you?" I shot back, turning to face her. "Because it doesn't seem like you've been worried about much of anything, Claire. Not when you were framing me. Not when you were meeting with criminals. And certainly not when you destroyed everything we built together." She flinched, the words hitting their mark. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and fixing me with a hard stare. "You don't understand, David. Then explain it to me," I said, my voice rising. "Explain why the woman I loved hell. The woman I married decided to turn my life into collateral damage for some smuggling ring. Was any of it real, Claire? Or was I just a useful idiot from the start?" Her composure cracked, just a little. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she ran them through her hair. "It was real," she said, her voice breaking. "All of it. But I got in too deep, and by the time I realized what I'd done, there was no way out." I laughed bitterly. "No way out? You had every chance to come clean, Claire, to ask for help. Instead, you threw me under the bus." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "You don't know what these people are like, David. Victory's not just some smuggler. He's ruthless. If I didn't cooperate, if I didn't do exactly what he wanted," her voice trailed off, but the unspoken threat hung in the air. "You still made the choice," I said coldly. "You didn't have to frame me." "I didn't know what else to do," she shouted, her desperation boiling over. Victor needed a fall guy, someone who could take the heat, while he kept running his operation. And you were already in the picture. It wasn't personal. Not personal? I snapped. You destroyed my life, Claire. My career, my reputation held, my freedom. And you have the nerve to tell me it wasn't personal. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, I thought she might actually be crying. But when she looked up, her expression was steely. "Do you think I wanted this?" she said, her voice low and raw. "Do you think I wanted to hurt you? I was trying to survive." We stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid filling the room. Finally, I spoke. "The FBI knows about Victor," I said. "I sent them everything. The video, the documents, his name. They're coming for him. And for you." Claire's face drained of color. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Afraid your little empire is going to crumble," I said, my tone dripping with venom. "You don't get it, David," she said, standing and stepping closer. "If they catch me, Victor will make sure I never live to testify. And if they catch him first, he'll take me down with him. Either way, I'm dead." "You should have thought about that before you dragged me into this mess," I said, my voice cold. Claire looked at me, her expression a mixture of fear and something I couldn't quite place. Was it regret? She took a deep breath and said, "I'll help you. I'll give you everything you need to clear your name. But you have to promise me one thing." I narrowed my eyes. "And what's that?" "Get me out of this," she said. "Help me disappear." I stared at her, the woman who had been my wife, my partner, my betrayer. She had torn my life apart, and now she was asking me to save hers. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Then I reached for my phone and called Greg. "Get the FBI?" I said, keeping my eyes locked on Claire's. "Tell them I've got her." Her face crumbled as the weight of my words hit her. She sank back onto the bed, defeated. "I loved you, David," she whispered as the sound of sirens filled the distance. "I really did." I turned away, unable to look at her. "Then you shouldn't have turned me into your enemy." When the agents arrived, I stepped aside, letting them take her. As they led her out of the room in handcuffs, she didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I walked out of the hotel and into the chaos of New York, I realized something. I wasn't the same man I'd been when this started. Claire had taken everything from me, but she'd also forced me to see the cracks in the life I'd built. Now, it was up to me to rebuild, not for her, and not for revenge, but for myself.